Who's an addict? Most of us do not have to think twice about this question. We know. Our whole life and thinking was centered in drugs in one form or another. The getting, the using, and finding ways and means to get more. We live to use and use to live. Very simply, an addict is a man or woman whose life was controlled by drugs, or still is. We are people in the grip of a continuing and progressive illness whose ends are always the same: jails, institutions, and death. So if you're questioning whether or not someone you know or yourself may be an addict, in this video, I will do my best to try to answer these questions for you. But you gotta have an open mind. As addicts, we always ask ourselves this question: am I an addict? Many of us who use mood or mind-altering substances have made a mess of our entire lives. We may have thought we might have just used too much. But addiction is a disease that is far more than just the use of drugs. Some of us believe we had an addiction long before we picked up a drug. After we put the drug down, though, we realized that it was really a disease, because we still had some of the main characteristics and behaviors that we had before. We were just minus the drugs, like in early recovery. Most people thought that if they could just stop using drugs just for a while, they would be okay. But it's our reaction to drugs that makes us addicts, not how much we use. Just for the record, everyone that drinks and uses drugs is not necessarily an addict. That's what this video is about, to show you the differences so you can decide for yourself if you or someone you know may have the disease of addiction. We suffer from a disease that expresses itself in an antisocial way. This is why detection and treatment at times can be very difficult. Because once we get our drug, we try to isolate ourselves from others, particularly others that aren't using drugs. We become hostile, self-centered, and self-seeking. And what we want matters most important over anyone else. We always want people to make leadway for us to be able to do the things we want to do so that we can get our drug. One aspect of our disease is the inability to live life on life's terms. We use drugs to try to deal with the reality of the real world. We look for that magic solution that will solve our ultimate problem: ourselves. As addicts, we finally get to a point where drugs stop making us feel good. When the euphoria wears off, we begin to see the ugly side of addiction. Then we start chasing the drug and going for more drugs because of the feeling that we once felt. But after continual use, you less and less feel the same feeling that you felt at the beginning. So it's like a rat trying to chase his tail, trying to catch up with something that you'll never feel again. When we had things like legal prescriptions, we abused that also, and we justified it. Oh, I have to take it. I have this pain. I have to take this, and I have to take that, this narcotic, that narcotic, to justify our using. But our body doesn't know the difference from a drug that we get on the street corner and a drug that is prescribed by a doctor. Addiction is addiction. That list that a lot of people have about things that they'll never do slowly starts to get checked off when you stay in active addiction. You start doing things that you thought you would never do. You start doing things that you've seen other people do and said, oh, I would never do that. As our addiction progressed, many of us find ourselves in institutions and in jail. In these institutions, we start regaining our health and start looking a little bit better than we did before. But most of the time, as soon as we got back out, we returned to using. Physical and mental tolerance play a key role. Many of us require no time at all in order to trigger something that leads us back to using. While using, our bodies experience a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde response. Dr. Jekyll being the person that through our addiction was using and doing all those things, and Mr. Hyde, the person that actually wants to stop but doesn't know how. And eventually, Dr. Jekyll took over and there was no more Mr. Hyde. We had to finally reach a bottom before we were willing to stop. We then start seeking help after all our bridges were burned and we had nowhere else or nobody else to turn to. We were ready for help. As addicts, we have an incurable disease called addiction. It can never be cured. But once we stop using, at some point recovery becomes possible. We must now concern ourselves with recovery. Once we identify ourselves in any of these programs we go to as addicts, that's when our help becomes possible because we've opened the door for it. As long as we're in denial saying we're not an addict, we don't need help, this and that, help cannot help us. We go to meetings and we start seeing a little bit of ourselves in other people. We start to identify that, hey, maybe this is the right place for me. Denial of our addiction made us sick, but an honest admission of recovery makes all things possible. Not only to live the life that you lived before you started using, but a life far beyond that one that you can't even imagine. In the meetings, we found not only clean addicts, but addicts that were actually working a program of recovery through the 12 steps. We wanted to learn how to do those. Hey, if he can do it, then I can do it. Especially when you see people that you were out there using with and you didn't know where they were and you hadn't seen them for a while and they were in those rooms. You start developing a life that is worth living. Not just existing, but living. We know there is no cure for this disease, but at some point it can be arrested through the 12 steps, through a sponsor, and through going to meetings. Recovery does work. It works if you work it. It works even if you don't. It just won't be working for you. If you like anything I said in this video, hit the like button, hit subscribe button. If you know anybody that you think is an addict or you think yourself is, dive deeper into a lot of my videos. I have videos up here that are about recovery. They'll be following this video on a playlist. You can look through and find topics that you think that you might need to hear before you make your determination on yourself. Help is always available. Until next time, the Libra Man is out.